we're all set here to pretty much wrap up the project system. And before we can do that, I have a few more to-dos on my paper to-do list that I haven't transferred to the text file. So let me get those in here. So let's see. Get typed array reference list. That one's actually done now, but I want to do a follow-up on it, which is pass a scratch arena down through the project parser. Right now I only pass an arena that is the arena that you push the project onto, but I want a separate scratch arena to do some other stuff, like these reference lists. Once I'm done with them, I want to be able to free them, and right now they get pushed onto the same arena that stores the actual data that we're creating, so I can't free them. After that, yeah, we have these other three things we want to do, and then there's an actual item 5 down here that we will expand out more once we've got everything else above, which is I need some new tutorials, and then I can ship. So let's get these little things done, and then we will talk about my plan for the tutorials, and I'll probably only be able to stream like I'll probably talk about what tutorials I'm going to do and make a little bit of a plan for them, and then I'll be going on and off line as I record them, and then maybe we'll have some streams today where instead of coding I'll be editing my tutorials together or something. I don't know. But let's get these other things done first. So first of all, let's finish this. This is the last thing I want to do on the cleanup before I get back to this and this. So in project, project commands, what's going on is there's this get reference list, or where is it? Reference list. Yeah, okay. So whenever I see that, what's happening is that list is actually going on to the same arena that like the actual project data is going on to. You can see that both of these go on that arena. And I can't free this data, but I want to free this data, which means I need a separate arena with a different lifetime, with different lifetime patterns than that main arena. So I'm just going to start pushing that around the whole system until it goes everywhere it needs to go. Because then I can put temp memory around all the places where I'm using that, and now what's happening is this is getting freed, basically, right? So that one's good. Let's go look for other occurrences of the reference list. Okay. And all we're doing here is basically saying that we used to be able to keep it all the way down to there was only sort of one allocation bucket that had one particular lifetime pattern, but now I need a second allocation bucket with a separate lifetime pattern, and so that's why there's a new arena. Alright. Reference list. And this is something I do a lot. Like a lot of my code, I'll end up having like 3 or 4 or 5 arenas before I finally go, you know what, arenas aren't really working for this. If I can keep it down to like a small number, like 3 or 4, I'm actually okay with it being a bunch of separate arenas that I have to pass in. But after that, it starts to get a little bit like, okay, the lifetime requirements are looking complicated enough that maybe, just maybe, we should think about switching to something more sophisticated. But you know, it's always a judgment call what the right way to do these kinds of things is. So sometimes I have one that's like 4 or 5 or 6 arenas all in the same time, just because they're all very appropriate for the purpose. Alright, get reference. I think that's the end of the reference lists. Okay. Now we just got to get that scratch arena pushed through the whole system. Let me take a quick moment to catch up with the chat. It's actually been busier than I realized. So Jim says he was kidding about using Clang or forcing Clang on users in the pre-stream, but I'm not entirely convinced that that's a joke. I mean, I know you think it's a joke, but I think there might be some merit to considering that at some point in the future. I mean, let me just float it to you this way. Imagine a future where projects like Lisa and there's a couple others, or like any one of these is working and it works on Windows. Then it would probably work with Clang. Clang doesn't need all this nonsense. So I would probably then, from then on, uninstall Visual Studio on all my computers, install Clang and use that debugger, and then any 4coder user, I would just expect them to install Clang as well. I don't see why that's actually that ridiculous. That seems like the future. Maybe not any time in the immediate horizon, but it could be like just a year or two before that's actually what we do. Rasmus asks, how many users for 4coder? It's hard to say how many users there are. I don't have like active user numbers, but I can tell you how many people have like bought it and stuff. I'm not gonna go look that up right now, but I can say that it's something like 300 people who've bought it, roughly. Since it's been on itch.io at least, there might have been some non-overlap between people on Patreon and people on itch. And that doesn't count all the people who've downloaded the free version. I don't know how many of them are using it. It's very hard to go off downloads because a lot of people download it 3 or 4 times. So it's very hard to go off of downloads, but there's definitely way more downloads that were free downloads than full version downloads, so I can't even tell you how many of those are users. Does or will 4coder have support for transparency in Linux? Do you mean like transparent backgrounds? What are you talking about, transparency? So you're actually talking about like being able to see through to the background. Yeah. No, there's not going to be any support for that. I'm not going to put time into something like that, at least not anytime soon. Maybe when I open up the rendering module and just document the API and say, hey, if you want to write your own renderer, go for it, then maybe you can get in there and look at what it would take to make that happen. For funsies, but yeah. Alright, so now we just need to push the Scratch arena through all these calls that don't have it already. And hopefully we'll find, like, this is one of those things where I'm starting from the bottom up and going, I need this here, and then I'm letting it bubble all the way up to the call site where the decision point will be made that did I actually have a Scratch arena or do I have to make a new one, will be decided at the very top of the system, right? And I don't actually know what the answer to that's going to be. So there we go. This doesn't have a Scratch available to it, so we'll bubble it up another step. Hopefully someone above me can answer this question. Okay, this guy doesn't have an answer, so hopefully the person above him can answer this question. We're just looking for a place where we can see which arenas are actually being used rather than having them. Okay, so here an arena is getting passed in right there. I think we still want to bubble this up. I'm looking for a time when someone's passing in an arena from a source that's like a part of the root data structures of the application and not just a parameter. Okay, here we have a Scratch. Okay, so this is where it gets complicated. This is the level at which someone passing in, okay, set current project from data passes in a Scratch arena. So that means that in this case, all that memory that we're saving for the project, like we're saying, okay, we want to be able to free this. That's complicated. So let me look at other uses. Here it's a scratch as well. Okay, let me see who's calling this, because if those are both going to be freed anyway, there's no point in freeing on this other schedule because, hey, it's all getting freed in the end. I just need to find occurrences of these things here. Global part. Yeah, so that's just using a global partition. There is no sort of set current project. Okay, so in set current project, what happens? We use a scratch arena. There is another arena right here. But that's only for... Okay, so... You know what? I take this back. This was a bad to-do item. I wanted to clean this up in this way, but I think that was the wrong call. So we're going to say canceled, undoing these changes. It turns out when we push something onto these arenas, these are all temporary ultimately anyway. So it's not that big a deal to have a little bit of extra memory sitting around as long as we are making these arenas big enough that they work anyway, because eventually they'll get the whole thing gets cleared and it gets copied into a dedicated arena all afterwards. Alright, let me catch up with the chat again. Yep, JAI support will be in there someday. As soon as I have the ability to mess with JAI, I will probably take the time to do everything to do. Like, you know what, that reminds me, I want to add something to my to-do list, because I do have a note from somebody about using JAI in 4coder. Alright. Do you still have the thought of 4coder also being a library? I have that thought, but I don't think it's anything I'm going to do right away. If I ever did that, I would have to start from scratch, I think. And I don't want to go down that road anytime soon. That could be a thing that's like, you know, if 4coder as it is stands pretty well, I might make like a 4coder 2 or whatever, like the new 4coder someday. Once I've seen the limits of this version, I might try that route and see if it has different trade-offs, different limitations, and if it can exceed and surpass this version. Yeah, Jim, as my understanding is that Klingon Windows now is a pretty good option. Thanks, Rasmus. Yeah, if you want to try it, that would be cool. I think 4coder customizations in JAI would be superior to the customization layer I have now, and I would actually start implementing portions of it in JAI if I had the JAI compiler available right now. Rasmus asks, by the way, what is your background? Do you mean my background as a programmer? I guess I don't know exactly how to answer that. I just do application development stuff, like you know, working on various tooling types of things. I've worked on an art tool, messed around with different sort of procedural art algorithms for it. I've worked on 4coder. Stuff like that. Yeah, basically a application tools programmer type stuff. I work at RAD right now doing that kind of thing. Are you editing an IDE with that IDE? I wouldn't call it an IDE, but yeah, I'm editing my my editor and compilation environment with my editor/compilation environment. I don't have a debugger in there right now, so it's not a full IDE yet. Arif asks, can I bind key to run certain script? Yeah, that's what the whole project system is. So when the project system tutorials come out, you'll see this more. But here's the new project system. So you can make commands, you give them a name, you give some options like what buffer they output to, whether they use a footer panel like this is a footer panel, or they can also use the full panel like up here. This says whether or not to save all the dirty files before running the command, and then you can see for each operating system you can set a different command line command. So this does echo build x64 and then it runs my build script. Alright, so you can see it says build x64 and it's running my build script. Now I also have a package, right here is a command named package, and on Windows it runs package.bat, and then you can see on F1 I have bound my build x64. If I hit F12 it builds my package on this panel. So yeah, that's the project 4coder, the 4coder project system. Doubter has a question about JAI. Let's see, saying that JAI could provide you all the info. I mean, you have its source code, so you could get the AST for free. Yeah, that's kind of a part of what's useful about it, is I do some metaprogramming stuff already. The really more complex and subtle reasons why I would want that is, right now I have one function signature for commands, and that doesn't really express the idea of like, oh, this is a command that the user is going to type in a string. What I'd really love to be able to do is say, here's the idea of a command, and I give it a full function signature, and then I note this as this is a command, and then I have a preprocessor type thing that converts that into a single signature thing with markup data that says, here are the parameters this command wants to have. Like it wants a string for like this and a string for this, like a query replace thing, for instance. It's a command with two parameters, and it would generate another procedure that has the fixed signature that all commands have to have, but with the markup data that says this thing needs two strings. And then I would no longer have to have my commands manually run the code that gets the parameters, but rather that would be auto-generated stuff, which is the way it should be. And then instead of like always having it being like, oh, I'm going to have this command get its parameters from the user, you can say call this command, but I'm going to pass the parameters, or I'm going to pass this parameter but still get that parameter from the user, and so there becomes a flexibility of how you invoke commands from other commands too. That's what I want to do once I have a nice preprocessor, like a real metaprogramming system that JI might have, once I get a chance to try it. Hold on a sec. So, Deb is serious. First of all, I'm not sure if you're thinking of the same RAD I'm thinking of. No. So I work at Rad Game Tools. I'll post the link right here. And, I guess you could say my background, someone was asking earlier what my background is. My background is all the things I do are most closely related to the games industry, but 4coder is very general and, you know, not very game specific in any particular way. Now, Dev is serious. I'm not sure why you can't see other chat messages. Can anyone else in the chat see him or her? I'm not sure what's going on there. Anyway, let's get back to work. So that was a long digression, but let's get to sounds like maybe I was just reading questions that were like still so far in the past that he hadn't seen them yet. Later, Dadder. All right, let's get something done here. So, last thing I did was I undid all those changes, and now let's go back to the to-do list. So this is canceled. Let's go look at making new commands now, or making new projects. Alright, so I actually want to kind of dig in here a little bit. I don't want to just upgrade this to working the way it used to. So first of all, project is set up. Project setup status. Okay, so that's dumb. We'll start by just fixing this to be properly styled. There we go. So the status thing basically figures out which parts of the project are already set up, the batch file, the sh file, and the project file. And then it returns a struct that says if which ones exist, and then if everything exists, right? And so then you can say, alright, if something doesn't exist, then it goes ahead and figures out which things it needs to create, and it creates them. So one thing I've thought about is maybe I sometimes want to say something like create a build script and not everything else, or something like this, like create the batch file only. And I'm not sure how I would do that easily, but I kind of want to just break this down into smaller pieces that I can recompose in other ways. So like right now there's no granularity here. If I say generate scripts, I think that does my batch file and then my sh file, and there's no way for me to say make a procedure that just generates a batch file, for instance. This one is fine. This just figures out these things, and I don't mind having those all grouped together. I suppose I could ultimately like pull them out into separate bools, but you can see they do a lot of shared work, so I mean the amount of work that this takes is really irrelevant to everything. So I think that's what we'll do. Let me just double check some other sources of questions and things. There's the Discord now, nothing new there. Alright, so let's start breaking these things down. First of all, let's pull out a thing that just generates a batch script and figure out what parameters it needs and all that kind of stuff. So, project generate bat script, right? Now I'm going to grab all this code and just cut it, and we're going to call project generate bat script. Oops, boom. There we go. Now we got to figure out what are some of the parameters that it needs. It needs to know the code file. It needs to know the output directory, and it needs to know the binary file. Okay, so now what is stir? Stir is just some nonsense up here. So we're going to try to phase that whole thing out and have a different method. So in addition to all of this, so this needs an app links, and it needs a scratch arena. Rasmus asks, how do you decide when to put code in a function and when you keep it in the current scope? I usually I'm pretty fluid about that, but the main concept is, in this particular case, the main concept is that I'm planning to use this code in different ways. So I basically have this long thing here, which I was fine with it being long the way it was because I didn't really have any other commands I wanted to build using similar code, but I'm now getting to the point where I'm thinking, I might want to be able to make just the batch file. And so I kind of want this code to be smaller because I want to be able to reason about the parts that go into it and then how I can recompose those into different parts. So there are two approaches I could have used. I could have said, well, there are three approaches I could have used. So the three approaches that I think of when I'm in this kind of situation are: one, you can wait until you've got duplicated code and then pull it out. In this case, you can see that the amount of code I would have to duplicate is this large, right? So if all of this, I would end up writing a separate script or a separate command that's like, alright, just generate a batch file, and it would probably look exactly like this. The amount of work it would take to then say, oh, here's and this duplicate each other, so let me pull that out into a non-duplicated place and call it from both. That's like such a large amount of text that I don't really even feel comfortable letting it duplicate once. So in preparation of what I think will be me duplicating it, I'm just pulling it out. If it was like 2 lines of code, I might write those other scripts and copy paste it and get it all working and then pull things out. But it's such a large piece of code that I've decided to invert that and go, I'm intending to duplicate that, it's huge, so I'm pulling it out first. The other thing I could have done is said, oh, I'm going to do like write the usage code first style thing where I say, I'm going to want the idea that I can generate a batch script, and I'm going to want the idea that I can generate an SH script, and so on, and make these concepts and then fill them in. But in this case, I already have the code that would fill those procedures in, so it's not really the right case to use usage code because I already know what this code needs to look like. Right? I already know what it takes to build to generate a batch script, and I'm just saying now the time is coming when I'm going to duplicate this code unless I pull it out. So since I'm anticipating that this will duplicate in the next 20 minutes of me working, I'm just pulling it out now to make it a smaller unit that is easier to work with. And the other thing that's nice about pulling something out that's kind of at play here is I'm trying to figure out what parameters this actually takes, right? So by pulling, when it's mixed in there, it could be that every single parameter, like every single variable in this entire thing is important. But then it gets hard to start picking things out like, oh, this string space thing here is actually kind of a nasty way to build strings. I have a better way to do this now. And so I would have missed out on the chance to re-examine the things that get passed into this piece of code, and I would have just copied it everywhere and not examined it. So now what's happening is I pulled it out and I'm going, alright, what are the parameters that this procedure has, literally, like as it was written, and what are the parameters I think it should have, and making changes to the code to make it more like what it should be versus what it is, based on the parameters that I conceptually think are appropriate for this kind of operation. So there's some different things at play there. So part of this is I'm pulling it out to learn what parameters this thing actually takes, and the other part is I'm anticipating that I'm going to duplicate this soon. So instead of letting that happen, I'm just going to pull it out now so that I don't ever have to go through the phase of duplicate and then unduplicate the code. That's all the thinking that went into that just now. So in particular, I've decided that this shouldn't be taking a fixed width string thing and using that to build its the name of the file. Instead, what should happen is, you see right here it's doing directory get hot. I could say that I want to avoid duplicating that out to all of if I look at it this way, string dot, so right here we're using that to figure out if this is set up. So I'm gonna have to do this anyway to figure out that. Then down here I use that string again and I push stuff onto it to get different file names and stuff. The only issue with all of that is it kind of means that I have to do this thing I don't particularly love doing, where I pass in a string for the purpose of allowing that string to be appended to, used, and then cleared again back to where it was when it was passed in. And instead I'm going to move to a different position. So we have all that. I'm going to add in path, right? That's like the output path. That'll get passed in as a parameter too. And then what I can do is I have this scratch arena coming in now. So I'm going to take a stir, and we're going to do we're gonna do memory to oh, that's different. Make string, yeah, make string cap. So we're gonna do make string cap, and we're gonna do space 0 and space capacity cap. So what is space? Well, space is just what I get when I push on to my Scratch arena, literally the entire space cap that I want. And what is the space cap that I want? Well, I figure I might as well take everything that is still, all the space that's still left inside that arena. So I'm just taking all of the space in the arena available and making the string, and then I can append onto my string the output path like that, right? So there we go. Then I can append onto that string, I don't need this, I can append onto that string again /build.bat, right? We have to do these things here. That's a bit nasty, but it's necessary. And then, oh, yep, I want to terminate that string with null. And let's see. So this is getting an output file. Let me see about that. So open, I have like open file, open something or other around here somewhere. Don't I? Whoops, come on. Somewhere around here we have like, okay, there's parse project config data version 1, config data nearest file, okay, so I need to go to my helpers and figure out yeah, those are all inputs. I don't know if I actually have a thing for opening an output file. So we'll just leave that the way it is, where it just calls fopen directly for now. I'm trying to like wrap all of this stuff in wrappers so that hopefully, maybe, just possibly, I won't have to rewrite all of this when I finally stop using fopen everywhere. And I mean, it's weird that I have like all these APIs that handle files, and yet they're not capable of doing the kinds of simple open a file, write to it, close it kinds of things that you want to do once in a while. They're only really good for like load a buffer, close a buffer, but you can't load a buffer, edit it, and close it in one frame without introducing some weird behavior at the moment, or like at least risks of weird behavior, especially when you're trying to write binary files. Okay. So here it's just printing out the entire, so we can see we've got the open file, and now we're just printing stuff out. So set the options, that's all the flags from the global config, that's fine. Well, what do we actually want to do there? I feel like that should be more parameters, right? So this is like options, ops.size, ops.string. So I'm getting a little nervous that I have so many parameters now that I'm not going to be able to remember where all of them come from. So I'm going to just come over here and start filling some of this in. So we have app, I think we have stir is the name of it, which is a bad name for it. We're going to get all of that cleaned up by the end of this. We need the Scratch arena. There we go. There's the output file names, the output path, and then some more, let's see, yeah, so the flags for the batch file. Now, really, I like to organize my outputs to go at the end, so I'm going to put those as outputs because they're specifying where the output is. I'm going to put this, actually, up here on a separate line. So there's opt. And then there's another one down here. Which compiler do we use? So that's just going to be compiler. And again, I'm going to put that over here, like that. So there's the flags that go in the batch file, there's the compiler that goes in the batch file, there's the output directory and output path. How is that different from output dir? Oh, okay. So output path, we're going to call this actually script path. Right. Output dir is where the binary outputs go from the script, not the path where the script goes. That's kind of confusing. We have code. We're writing code that writes code that writes code. Well, that builds code. We're writing code that writes code that builds code. So we got a couple of different layers of output strings or output directory like concepts here. Okay. So that's good. We build up that thing called string there is more like file name. Make file naming cap. No. Make string cap. There we go. Alright, so we open that thing, and then we're outputting you. Options code slash you and you. Popd, and then we're done. Could not create build.bat for new projects. So I'm going to actually take that out there. We're going to make this a thing where this can return a success status. Return success. That way we don't actually need to pass an app in there. And that makes that line short enough that we can just do that, which we won't replicate over here because those are really long parameter names, but hey, whatevers. And then this is if that does not happen, then could not create build.bat for new project. There we go. There we go. Let's see what we've got over here. You can't do that. So Edvin Holm asked, if you want to create a new file called X and you already have one called XY, where Y is some string appended to X, how do you do that with the Control-O command? If you press Enter after typing X, you will open XY. That's right. You have to hit. You have to use the new file command. So Control-N will always create a file if it doesn't exactly match something. In fact, even if it does exactly match something, it makes a blank buffer with the exact name you type in. So Control-N if you're in that situation. Yeah, that exact reason is why for a long time I had Control-N and Control-O were both necessary. One for creating new files, and Control-O wouldn't create new files. But so many people were just like, most of the time Control-O for new files is okay, but that one case I don't know what to do. Now I think that there's like there might be like you can do Shift Enter, no, 4coder.txt Control Enter. Yeah, Control Enter is your other option. So did you see that just now? If I close this, Control O to open, and then I do 4coder. Let me pick something that is a like what you're doing though, because that actually wasn't a very good test case. Let's do jumping. So I already have 4coder jumping.cpp. I'm going to do 4coder jumping.c and then Control Enter. No, that doesn't work either. So yeah, you just got to use the Control-N command instead. Project commands. Okay. So build errors. Let's see what's going on. Oops, I'm using the wrong types here. S32. That's not this code base. Yeah, RareF has the right idea. I put the taskbar over here because it makes the taskbar smaller, and I put it on the right because my dual monitor setup has the monitor you're seeing is on the right, so I want the taskbar to be not dividing my monitors, but on the side, right? That's all that went into that. If it went along the bottom or the top, it just takes up more space then. And I mean, particularly vertical space is more important to a programmer usually, because horizontal space just decides when wrapping happens, whereas vertical space lets you get a few more lines in there, and so you get like a better layouts basically happen this way. Alright, so we pulled the batch script builder thing out. So that writes a batch script. Let's do the same thing for shell scripts. Yes, all of this code here. Copy. Static bool 32 project generate sh script. Doop. Doop. Going to end up having this thing again. We're going to take one of these, put it right there, project generate sh script, and now we've kind of seen the ropes. We can be pretty sure that it's going to be the same thing again, maybe with a couple tweaks, like for instance, since we're doing sh scripts now, we'll pass in a different set of options from the config. But now we can see the flow of data more clearly, at least I can. It used to be kind of buried that this was pulling stuff out of the config to make these project files. Now I can see that, oh yeah, I actually am, this isn't just something you call it. It has to pull some stuff out of the config, it has to pull some stuff out of the hot directory, and I'm getting a clearer picture of where the information has to come from to do the work. Because I pulled them out into separate procedures. This is revisiting that question briefly. We need all that again. Boom. Alright, so that's gonna go away, and all of that stuff up there has to happen again. So we want this through this. That all still happens. We need an end temp down here. We need success equals true right here. So yeah, let's see how close that got us. Right, this needs to be file name. Oh, come on. Alright. So there we go. We can see that these are almost identical. The only difference is that the procedure has to switch to whichever type of script we're building, and the scripts themselves are pretty similar too, but they're a little different. And then which flags we pass here has to change, but otherwise we could end up sort of starting to see this becoming a loop where it's like, these have such similar structure, why don't we just have a thing that's like, here are the different scripts that get generated, and like, here's the procedure that generates it, here's where you pull your flags from, here's the messages you spit out when it fails. Or maybe I don't even have to do the messages you spit out when it fails, I can just say that it's like sh and .bat, like the extension names maybe, right? Whatever. Point is, and then once I've done all that, it becomes possible to turn this into a single loop, and if there ever becomes a situation where I want another script that fits into this pattern, it kind of just slots in very nicely without extending this code more. But we're not going to go that far right now. There's only 2 of them. Not time to take that, like, not time to jump through that hoop right now. Rasmus asks, is there a roadmap to the release of a non-alpha version of 4coder? Not exactly. Kind of. So, let me pull something up that will basically answer that question, but it was not explicitly made to be a roadmap to the end of 4coder alpha, but it pretty much answers your question. So my latest blog post on 4coder.handmade.network is scheduled for new builds, which basically describes the various phases I'm going through to retire the current engine. Once this schedule of builds has been completed, then the alpha will be retired, which means I won't be making any new builds of the alpha, and I will be going on kind of a 6 to 8 month journey of only doing all the work it takes, maybe a year of doing all the work it takes to get from alpha to beta, and then the beta will come out for the first time. Right. So yeah, we're currently on this stage, a project file upgrade. Then we have this thing here. These are basically a few features that are critical to making 4coder viable, like as viable as possible for the 6 months to a year that I don't actually make any more progress on it. So there's that. There's undo, redo upgrades, and then there's a couple of non-feature things. The finalizing the keyboard input system so that it's better international support. And then lots of tutorials and documentation of the alpha, and the plan is to have as much of this done as possible by the end of 2018. I think that this to-do list will end in 2018, and then 2019 will probably be no builds until very late in the year, if at all, and that'll be the beta. That's the plan. Alright, one more question, and I will get back to it. There's also a roadmap on the website, but it's kind of bogus at this point. It hasn't been updated for a while. Maybe I should rewrite that one when I do all the documentation stuff. Will 4coder have, or does it already have, a traditional text selection? So, this is a good question. Hold on one sec. Alright, there we go. My chat was being weird. So right now it does the Emacs style. You have a mark and a cursor, and it's a little bit nicer than Emacs because you can see the mark, but it's pretty much the same thing, and not everyone's a fan of this. So you're talking about being able to do you hold shift and you move to the right as it selects things, and that would look something like this, right? You're moving to the right. But so this kind of highlight is in there, but there's no editing paradigm for that right now. The plan is to eventually move the idea of cursors and stuff like that entirely into the custom layer, and then to provide all of the sort of typical modes. And then there's basically 3 major paradigms. There's that paradigm you want, that'll be in there. There's this one, that'll do the Emacs / 4coder style thing, the old. At that point, it'll be old style 4coder, but that'll be in there. And then there's the sort of Vim style thing where you have a cursor somewhere, but then to do an operation, you specify the size of the thing you want to operate on. So in Vim you say okay, select this. This isn't literally what you do. Usually what you would actually do is say delete by hitting D or something, and then Word or whatever, W, and that would delete all of this, right? Like that. Or maybe it would do, so delete Word would be the same as this, which in Emacs style is place a mark, control space, move to the end of a word, control right, delete that word, control D. It's a lot more commands. You're holding control for all of them. So that's why people prefer the Vim style over both this and the other one is hold shift and move to the right until you're to here, right? And now you've selected this, and then you can hit backspace or whatever to kill it all at once. So all of those have trade-offs, and there's no clear one which is better in terms of oh, this one just outperforms this one in all possible ways when you sort of stack them up and literally measure the number of keystrokes it takes to do different types of operations and the amount of work it takes to figure out what keystrokes lead to where you want. Because there's 2 separate things. There's how many keystrokes it takes to do the thing you want to do, and there's also how much work it takes for you in your head to figure out which keystrokes do the thing you want to do. And Vim optimizes for very few keystrokes to achieve what you want in most cases. Not in all, but in most cases, few keystrokes to get what you want, but the most possible work to actually figure out which keystrokes it takes. Whereas I think Emacs style inverts that the other way, and well, no, that's actually So the other end of the spectrum is the most possible keystrokes is the one you're asking for, and the least work to actually think about what you need to do. And Emacs sits in this weird in-between spot where it takes more keystrokes than Vim, but less than the highlight selection thing. So I'm going to provide all of those, is the short answer. As like different paradigm, different default setups that you can choose from in the beta, not in the alpha. So that'll be a while still, but it's coming someday. Okay, so let me update my paper to-do list real quick. Alright, let's get back to this. So we have batch scripts, we have SH scripts. I think that this one will actually work out to be the same. Yeah. So this is for building the that, and I suspect that we'll just end up doing the exact same stuff again. That's my suspicion. We'll find out, but I think so. Yeah, I could see that. So if you want to do something like hold shift and then hit end to move to this side, right, and then backspace, that's pretty good. The alternative is control space, and now you're not holding anything, and then a delete command, which is kind of pretty similar. It depends on whether you prefer. It depends on how. One thing that also matters is how heavily you weight such things as holding a modifier down for a long time. Like one thing you don't have to do as much in the Emacs setup is hold down shift while you select things, right? You never have to hold shift down and do a bunch of work with shift held down. So if holding a modifier down is something you want to avoid because, for instance, your pinkies get tired out more quickly, which I'm in such a situation, then the trade-off feels a little different than if you're like, oh, for me it doesn't happen so much that holding a modifier down starts to wear my this side of my hand out quickly. So yeah, I agree with you that they all look similar in certain ways, but there are different ways of weighting which things cost more and less that causes the trade-off to shift around. So we want this here. So that we can do project generate project 4coder file. Okay, so code file. Okay, what I don't get is why am I doing anything with code file when it doesn't actually get used? Output file and binary file are both getting used. but code file is actually just not in there. So code file is gone. You don't have to get past in this one. Yeah, okay. So another thing I should think about is that, okay, so we're gonna make another pass over to eliminate these in a minute here. Okay. So this is gonna take Scratch. I don't think it needs options or compiler either. It's a very different beast, actually, in some ways. Stir output directory binary file. Okay, so we haven't reduced the code size at all of the program, but we've made it much easier to reason about what it will look like if I just want to do one of these and not all of them, right? So that's a nice little bit of progress. As I said, I'm a little concerned about a few of these other weird things that are still happening. So let's start dealing with them. Alright, so the idea here is I don't like this. I would rather do yeah, so we're going to take the entire space of this thing. That's going to be renamed to script path. And so we're taking the whole thing. We then get the directory, the hot directory, from the core, like so. We don't need this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, we've got the project is set up. I don't love that. Dir. Okay, so we're gonna revisit this too. I do not love it. Now that I look at it again. But once we've done this, what we can do is we can say, okay, so we end that temp right there, but we're going to end it again later too. And why is that? Well, this temp is just a restore point that's been set into the arena, right? And then I allocate some more onto it, and then I can restore to that, and if I want to, I can restore to it again. There's no reason I can't just keep restoring to it. So when I say end temp, that doesn't have to end a block. That just says, you know, take me back to here, and then I can do that again if I want. And so I've basically said, give me the entire arena, put the string into it, and I'm going to end the temp and push in enough space to reserve the space that I need just for that. So push array onto Scratch. That's just enough space to store this. We're going to set the capacity now. And the reason I have to do this much typing to do a fairly simple operation is because I was so bad at making string APIs when I started 4coder. In the beta, I will go through all of these APIs. A lot of it's going to get torn up because there are much better ways to do these things that I have discovered since then that would make this entire thing like 3 lines of code. In 3 lines of code, you would get the fully correct, space-efficient and speed-efficient thing in terms of the number of operations it has to do, in terms of the amount of space it takes, in terms of the number of lines it takes. It's much smaller, so it's easier to do the right thing, etc. Anyways, point is, now we have the path sitting on our arena right there, exactly the right amount of space is taken up for it. We've updated the string right there, and now we want to say, okay, yeah, so the next thing is, these things have been using the name stir when I pass them, right? So those are queries to the user. Then there's here, script path instead of stir. There we go. Okay, so that's all good. Now my next problem is this guy. I don't like any of that. We're going to take it all out, and we're just going to pass in script path as a string, and we're never ever going to go down this code path anymore. We're always going to use this one. So that lets us reduce a lot of this to a simpler situation. We need 15, so it pushes that on, copies that there. That can just say script path now. I do want a quick dirlen equals dir.size right here, as I'm then going to push onto that string this, check if the file exists, and then I restore to there on the string, and I push on build.sh, check if that exists, and one more time project.4coder, check if that exists, and then we're done. Okay, so that stuff's all cleaned up. We no longer have those fixed with the arenas, or fixed with the race around. These are okay to be fixed with because these are being typed in by the user, so the width shouldn't be any longer than the number of characters you can reasonably fit along the top of the screen anyway, so 1024 more than enough. The only other thing that I don't love is these things here that modify the strings in place and then modify them back later. We're not going to do that nonsense anymore. Instead, before I get any of those things, what we're going to do is we're going to push copies of these strings. So we're going to do like, how do I want to do this? I'm going to just call it CF, OD, and BF. Alright, I guess I should keep that around, so I'll keep this one up here. So we're going to do, I think I have push string copy is an option these days. Yep, there we go. Oops, there we go. And I want to do scratch code file, and this just pushes an exact copy of these strings onto my arena, so it's a separate copy that I can modify and not have to unmodify it later. Yes, this involves a copy and then a modify instead of a modify unmodify, so maybe it's more work, but it's just nicer to read. It's going to be less code. It's just it's less stateful. It does all the kinds of things that make it easier to reason about the code in the future. And this is again not really the kind of thing that's going to be those are the wrong ones. This is not the kind of code here that's even really going to be on the hot path, right? I'm not worried that it's going to be like, oh my gosh, every time I build a project, I'm noticing it just takes forever as it like copies a couple of short file names and manipulates them. So and this isn't something that runs every frame, it's very rare, so it makes sense to just go a little bit, you know, no point in like over optimizing. We can copy a string if it makes it easier to reason about the way the code behaves. So we do that, and now code file, whenever that gets mentioned down here, we're just going to say CF, bf, where's output directory, od, oh, excuse me. Alright, so that's pretty good. In the interest of keeping symmetry now, I'm gonna do something else. I'm not gonna push copies this time because I'm not even modifying the string anywhere. If I ever wanted to modify the string, then I would bother to push the copies, but, you know I just gave this whole talk about might as well be as picky as it takes to be easy to reason about, but in this case, you know, it's easy to reason about even if in the slightly faster thing. Ooh, this code here I never switched to using ops. There we go. And that code down there is still using the config flags directly too. That's not good. That should be compiler. There we go. So let's see, CF, where's output dir? Yes, OD. Perfect. Alright. Dirlen. Alright, so that's supposed to say script path.size. Perfect. Alright, let's see if I can make a new project still. If that still works, then we've done our first step of this, and I will cut the stream off for a short break, and we will get back to actually building out a few other commands and upgrading the thing. So we haven't actually done any of the upgrades we need to do either. So I need to, like, you know, actually look at what changes do I need to make to the project file that I generate, and then I can also ask, can I make a couple new commands for generating batch and shell scripts independently of project files. But let's just test what we've got, so I can wrap up this phase of the upgrade. As I set this up, I will. Oh, question's already been answered by the chat. Yeah, this is not Windows XP, Windows 7 with the basic theme. All right. So let's just do a quick test project. Oops, micdir test project. That's a little confusing still. All right, test project micdir make directory at new project. Build target is main.cpp. Output directory is build. Binary is test. Okay, so it just loaded that project for me. And what do we have here? Okay, so it's still generating that. That looks correct. Is that correct? Hold on. Let me go to my config real quick. 4coder config. No, get out of here. Give me my config file. There we go. So according to my config, I take -g. Okay, yeah, okay. So that's all still working, same way as it ever was. I'll delete that now. Okay. So I'm going to take a 5-10 minute break, and then we will get back and we will make it generate a modern version 1 project, not the old style thing that we just saw. Alright, see you guys in a bit. Bye bye.